Hello, everybody. How are we today? Awesome. Actually, I got a lot of thumbs up there, which I felt was rubbing it in, so thank you. I appreciate that. Well done. I'm Ryan Niemiller.
I'm Brannon Zahand.
And we're going to talk about some accessibility today. Why don't you give them just a little overview of who you are and why you are allowed to talk about this?
It was 1978. It was a dark and stormy night. So my name is Brannon Zahand. I work for Xbox. I am a senior gaming accessibility program manager there. I've been working in the industry for 25 years. I've been working on game accessibility for 20 years. And I take that back, 22 years in the industry, 20 in accessibility. My job, in a nutshell, is to make video games better for people with disabilities.
My name's Ryan Niemiller. I do not work in the gaming industry. I play too many video games. That's who I am. So he is making games for me, specifically. That is what I've told him he has to do from now on, now that we're friends. So kind of why I'm here, if anyone is not familiar with who I am, I'm a professional stand-up comedian. That's what I do for a living. I'm a performer. I was on America's Got Talent back in 2019. I got third place. I'm officially the third most talented person in this country for 1 year. It was voted on, so it's real. And for me, kind of why we're together talking about this, so I've been a gamer since the NES, so I've been playing for 35 years of my life, and I grew up really poor in a small town in Indiana. We didn't have any knowledge of accessibility per se. I was born with this disability, and we were just kind of in a position, I'm an old trailer park kid. I was, accessibility for me was, hey, go figure it out. And that's kind of how I feel a lot of, video games, especially from my point of view, over the years has been for a lot of it. I was able to play NES because it's 2 buttons and a D-pad. I had the technology for that. Then Super Nintendo comes out. They had a couple on the top, and I'm like, all right, let's slow down. I can figure this out, but and then as things progressed, it's like, okay, now I need a backpack with turret guns, and I have to use my face to push stuff, and I need to get an erection so I can push the Z trigger. Nobody wants to play games at my house for some reason. I don't know why. It's like I just got an Xbox, come over, game on, pants off, here we go.
You are not allowed to play games at my house. You're not invited.
Fair enough. I just really like video games. I really like them.
At least bring your own controller.
Fair enough. So for me, I kind of want to, for this talk, Brandon's going to kind of be the knowledge, the actual know-how, coming from the Xbox team. And I'm going to kind of give the perspective of someone who lives this world, who actually exists having a disability.
Awesome. Yeah, and just as an aside, just so you don't get to hog the whole disability spotlight here, I also have disabilities. Mine happen to be invisible, but I am on the neurodiversity spectrum. I have chronic pain, and I also have something called trigeminal neuralgia, which causes all sorts of problems with hearing and balance and all sorts of fun things. So yeah, a few games recently that have not been good for me. Starfield, because I was getting a little motion sick. So we just dropped the field of view slider to help address that. Really excited for that.
I just want to point out this is not a competition, Brandon. All right.
I'm a competitive guy.
Fair enough. Let's kind of talk a little bit, I guess, about. I'll kind of start with this for me. Where do you kind of see where accessibility is right now? As far as, like, do you think overall the business is handling it well, not well, better than it used to? Kind of like the history of where we're at now compared to where we were.
Okay, so to answer your question, I'll tell a little story about how I got into gaming accessibility. So I joined Microsoft to launch Xbox Live in 2002. That's why I have such an awesome gamer tag, because we all got to pick our gamer tags before they opened it up to the rest of the world. So I'm Tenchi. So I came on to launch that service, and at the same time I was doing some volunteer work at Seattle Children's Hospital Regional Medical Center. Didn't know a lot of people in the Seattle area. I was looking for something to do on the weekends, and I used to volunteer at hospitals in the past. So one day, I had come in and they had asked me to go hang out with a 13, 14-year-old girl. She was not doing really well. She had been living in the hospital for over a year. She had a number of medical conditions and was just not in a good headspace, right? And they asked, well, can you go over and chat with her? And I said, sure. So I went over and chatted with her, and I was like, hey, you want to do arts and crafts? No. You want to watch a movie? No. You want to play a board game? No. Finally, I just said, do you want to play video games? And she goes, no, I don't like video games. I said, oh, well, you know, I work for Xbox, and you know, I'm kind of curious, like, why don't you like video games? And she looked at me and she pointed at me and she said, because you don't make any I can play. And I felt like an absolute idiot, because it had not occurred to me in that moment that she, because of her medical conditions, was not going to be able to play a lot of the video games that we had out there. And so the very next day I went into work and I started asking around, what are we doing for people with disabilities in gaming? And it was silence. No one had heard of, people within gaming had not heard the word accessibility. In the productivity space, in the office space, OS, people knew about it because there were governmental rules and regulations. If you were selling to the government, software had to be accessible. But back then, there was nothing for accessibility. So I started reaching out, and at that time, there were probably 5 or 6 people I could find in the entire industry who were even talking about accessibility, and I started learning from them. Now, fast forward to that moment, from that moment, to the fact that we are just released Forza Motorsports 8, and that game is blind, like you can play it if you're blind, right? Okay, so we went from nobody doing anything to now we have blind accessible games. Last of Us Part 2, shout out to Naughty Dog. I'm platform agnostic with Sony, awesome. That's fantastic, right? As Dusk Falls, blind accessible. So how far we've come is incredible. That said, we have a long, long way to go. And I think the challenge is getting people to not, now that we know how to do the things, and we've shown people how to do the things, we need people to start doing the things. And we need them to do more often. So it's not just 3 games that are blind accessible, it's 300, 3,000, right? That's kind of the next step.
Yeah, like for me, I as a gamer, I've always felt it's a weird place to be, and I don't know if I should have felt almost guilty for wanting things to be accessible, because when you live with a disability, a lot of times you're kind of treated as other. You know, like you're in a different group, you're in a different thing. So it's like, especially with something like video, and I've always been passionate about video games. Where it really hit me was when the Nintendo Wii came out. I think that was the first time it really hit me that I was not being factored in. Because before that, any video games that came out, I might have had a little difficulty, but I personally was able to adapt and figure it out where I could play the games. When the Wii came out, the technology they were designing was very big on the motion controls. They wanted you to, you know, hold one thing here, hold one thing here, and swing about. And I was like, well, I guess I won't play Skyward Sword then. I guess Mario Galaxy's not for me. Nintendo doesn't care about me anymore. And that's sort of where I had my first taste of feeling like, oh, I'm not necessarily being catered to. And you start to feel weird about it is because disability is such a large spectrum, you know, that means so many things. My disability is not your disability. We both technically have a disability, but no one would qualify what we have as being the same. What we would need for gaming is completely different. And it made me feel guilty to think, like, well, no, maybe Nintendo should not make this console for me specifically because I am a minor subset. But I also want to freaking play Mario Galaxy. That looks a lot of fun. And so you kind of get in this weird space, and it makes me appreciative now, especially, you know, as an adult, and I'm a father now. My son does not have my disability, but just kind of knowing, you know, who knows what is going to happen for him, to know that there are teams that are now working on this type of stuff. And at least, you know, it's not perfect. There's so much work to be done, but at least people care now. And that's helping me kind of get through a lot of it.
I just feel terrible, because like that you felt you had that moment where you were like, maybe I'm just a small enough subset of the population that this isn't for me, right? I mean, you're a dad now, and I'm a dad, I have 2 kids. And the worst feeling I've had as a parent is watching my children be excluded from things. You know, my kids come home and get invited to a birthday party that everyone's going to, or I didn't make the select hockey team, which is a recent one. You know, the kids being excluded, and I think all of us in the room have that moment, can easily come to a moment where we're like, yeah, I remember being excluded and how bad that felt, right? And so, while I think the cynical amongst the industry would say, yeah, there are just some people that things aren't going to work with. It's like, our goal in the accessibility community is to keep that number to an absolute minimum, right? I think there are things that could have been done to make that experience accessible for you that wouldn't have broken the bank. I'm not trying to call anybody out here. I'm just saying, like, that was a different time, right? Different era. There were a lot of things that could have been done that weren't, right? And so what we have to do is figure out a way to do those things, think inclusive when we're designing, make sure we are making games with our community, not for our community. That's a really important one. And, and being open-minded and, being creative in the way we approach solutions. It's very easy to look at that problem and go, man, there's just nothing. Like,
yeah, that sucks, bro.
But people say the same thing about blind gaming, right? Video is in the title of the game. It's video games, and you want a blind person to play video games, and yet we can do it now. So again, that took creativity, that took a lot of working with the community, but it is possible. It's just we need people to think about it early in design and development, and we need them to commit to it for the long haul.
Yeah, and it is nice too. Like you made a really good point, I think, with the making it with the community, not for the community, because having this limb difference my whole life, it is wild the amount of stuff that people will try to fix for you that you didn't ask for. And I feel like having people, in a position to make decisions and make things that are actually listening too, because people can, it's a good PR move to say like, yeah, we want disabled people to play.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you have an example? Do you have one that you can think of that is just like, what the heck?
This is a general, just a general thing that's happened through my life.
Okay.
But I can tell you like this, for instance, like if I go to a fast food place and I go in and I order my food, the amount of times that people will not listen to me and just like, I'm going to carry this to your table for you. I'm going to do this. And I'm like, look, you can tell by looking at my physique, I figured out Taco Bell. Like that is something at this point, I can do. Like, having a disability, it's so weird. Like, even if people are well-meaning about it, like, I don't think that was malicious by any means. They're trying to help, but they're trying to help where help was not asked for. Like I know what to do. Like, I'm gonna go ahead and admit this now. I had Hans tie my shoes earlier, because I still have a lot of difficulty doing that. And so for me, I could walk around and possibly die because I tripped on my shoe, or I could be like, hey Hans, can you help me out with this, bro? And he was like, yeah, absolutely, no problem. People with disabilities, we generally know what we need and what we don't. So if you make us a part of the conversation, we're gonna save a lot of awkward moments for you. I don't like having to humiliate people who work at Wendy's. Because they, I don't want to make a scene, but sometimes you're just like, how about you just give me my damn burger so I can go eat? Like you're making this a thing now.
Yeah.
You're drawing a lot of attention to me that I don't want right now. I just want to eat my lunch. So it's refreshing to hear that at least your team is coming from it from that kind of perspective of, we don't just want to help blind people because that's what you're supposed to do. Like, we want to actually talk to, how can we help you play this game? Like, what do you actually need to get this done?
Yeah, and thankfully the community is so awesome in terms of wanting to work with us. And so not only are we trying to share this mantra of building with the community, not just within our own studios, but within the broader industry, right? We're also trying to talk about how people engage with the disability community. For example, from an etiquette perspective, what that person did in that situation was not good. And we have a lot of game developers who, even if they were like, yes, absolutely, we want to go develop for people with disabilities, a lot of them would be afraid to even reach out to the community, right? So a lot of it is just teaching people about how to just have a conversation with someone who's disabled, right? I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but like a lot of developers ask me that they're scared. They come to me and I had one developer who told me, dude, I I think I screwed up. And I was like, what, man? Like, is everything? He's like, yeah, well, we brought in this blind person, and I used the word see. What? See. Like, how do you say it? It's like, well, he said, well, I said something like, well, you see, blah, 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 blah. Dude, you're fine. It's good. You're okay. But people have those concerns, right? People ask me questions about, how do I, should I talk slower to someone who's deaf? Should I, when is it okay to pet a service dog? Hint, never. And yeah, I mean, so, not only do we want to teach people about why it's important and how to do it, but we also want to teach people how to bring the community in and have those conversations so that they're included in that process in a really meaningful and valuable and enjoyable way for everyone.
Yeah, I can just tell you, anecdotally, like, people, like, as a comedian, I love those situations.
Yeah.
But as a person with a disability, not so much.
It's good material, though, for you, right?
Yeah, the amount of times that I've clearly been somebody's first fist bump ever because they're scared to shake my hand. But I've literally seen, I've been in a group of 3 or 4 of my friends, and someone's coming, and they're like, oh, nice to meet everybody, and they're like, handshake, handshake, handshake. I'm like, dude, you're not gonna catch it. That's not how. You'll only catch it if I spit in your mouth. Everybody knows that. And I rarely do that. So, I can tell you again, coming from at least my personal perspective, and disability is not a broad brush that you can say this works for everybody. I would much rather have somebody ask me a sincere question, even if they're a little nervous about it. Mm-hmm. Okay, how do I shake your hand? You bring it in. That's what I want personally. If you just ask the question, the worst thing I hate is guessing or someone making that decision for me. And it sounds like, a lot of what accessibility gaming was kind of that for a little while. It was, maybe the heart was in the right place, but we're just gonna guess. Do you want a helmet that does this? No, that's cumbersome and weight. That doesn't actually solve the problem. Ask me and we'll talk about it.
So it's actually funny, okay, warning, shameless plug. So it's funny you mention that because, have you ever heard of something called the Xbox Adaptive Controller?
I have, personally.
Okay. That's it. If you haven't seen it, everyone's always like, wow, they took an NES controller and they supersized it. The reason this device is really cool, I won't tell you the whole story and all the awesome stuff that the team did to build this, because by the way, I was hardly involved at all. If you look on the back of the device, there are 20 ports, okay? One for each button on an Xbox controller, plus 2 extras, 2 bonus ones that you can map to whatever you want. Additionally, we have a USB port on the left and a USB port on the right. And I can plug joysticks in. And not only can I plug joysticks in, but I can map the first 8 buttons on those joysticks to whatever I want, right? All in software. I can create profiles per game, and I can change those by just tapping a button on the device. The reason we build it this way, I promise there's a way getting back to what you were saying, was that we wanted people to be able to build what they needed, right? Because if we tried to build a device for you, it probably wouldn't work for other people, right? There's what if somebody didn't have any limbs at all, or what if someone was just one-handed but had all their fingers on one hand? Trying to solve for one person in that way would be really difficult. But if we can come up with solutions that allow people to build their own or customize their solutions, their experiences, to make them their own, that's when things become highly accessible and inclusive, right? So that's one of the things that, we try really hard to think about is we want to allow people to come up and design and create the experience that will work best for them. And whether that's turning on certain options, whether that's using certain hardware, whatever it is, we want to be flexible in that regard.
Yeah, and since I've mentioned it a couple of times, that disability is not, it's very different spectrums for everything. That just having the options, I think, is super important. And it's frustrated me a lot over my years of being a gamer that certain things, and again, I don't know how to program games. I don't want to claim something's easy or hard because I don't have the expertise to know if something actually is easy or hard. But certain things that, maybe I didn't need an adaptive controller with 20 different ports to do things. Yeah. But how about an option just to remap buttons? You know, which to me, again, not being a programmer, I don't know how easy this actually is. It doesn't feel like it's that intense.
It's easy.
Fair enough.
Button remapping, easy.
But you know, I'll tell you one thing. Just a little story. In college, I played so much Halo Combat Evolved. So our apartment was the LAN party apartment. People would bring their giant CRTs and their Xboxes. We get 16 people playing. It was awesome. Some of my greatest memories from college were that. Halo 2 comes out, and they add dual wielding. And I don't get to play Halo with my friends anymore, because now I'm not competitive. You know, because like it's something, if you would have let me remount the buttons a little bit at that time, I could have figured out a way where I could still feel that I wasn't, you know, cannon fodder for my friends just to up their kill count. You know, and at the time it was very frustrating, because so many of my formative, you know, of being a really passionate gamer was playing Halo with my friends. And for a while I felt, okay, Halo 2 let me down. I felt a little disappointed that I didn't get to do that. And in my head, at the time, again, not having the expertise, I'm thinking, just let me move these buttons around. That's all I would need to do. And that was not there for me.
Yeah, and so first off, two things. One is that accessibility is easy if you think about it from the beginning. It really is. If you're starting from scratch and you're trying to make a game accessible, if you're doing it early, you're talking to your devs, you're laying out your framework, it is not hard at all. In fact, some of the most accessible games out there, Eagle Island by Pixelnix, Hyperdot, things like that, super, super accessible, literally made by like one person in a garage. And it's insanely accessible, right? But it's because they thought about it from the get-go. Now, as I give you an example, so I used to work on Halo, so I feel insulted. No, don't worry about it, I came on after that. So I worked on Halo 5, Halo Infinite, and Halo Wars 2. And you know what, I'm gonna apologize for a second. My neurodiversity just kicked in, and I lost my point. We were talking about...
You were going to praise me for something.
Yeah.
You were going to give me a compliment.
It was, oh yes, it was, sorry, thank you. It was about accessibility features. So with Halo 5, when we were looking at it and I came into the team, I was like, hey y'all, can we please enlarge the text in the game? I just want an option to make the text bigger. That's it. Seems simple, right? Easy, cake. And I remember Frank O'Connor, who was our creative lead at the time, was like, do you know how much work that would be? Like, do you know how many months of work that would take? Well, it's because we were building on a tech stack that was old, right? We'd been developing forever and ever and ever. By that point, it was like it's like baking cookies and trying to jam the chocolate chips in after the cookies are baked, right? It's not going to work well. So that was the point.
I would still eat that cookie. But.
It's a couple mess, but I'm good. But yeah, so what I would say is we really want people to think about accessibility early, often, and it's not going to be a problem. Like if they tackle it that early.
Yeah, and the tough part has to be, and I always try to think about from the other side of it as well, because I think that helps me being on this team to be able to communicate with that team as well, is that it's hard to think of every concept, and I know that, like I have a pretty unique disability. I feel it would be weird for me to think that you should have known about this when you started, you know? Because even as far as having a limb difference, my limb difference is very different than someone who, like you mentioned earlier, has a full hand and missing a hand completely over there. Two different animals. Yeah. You know, so sometimes I feel even in just the limb difference community, I can't relate directly to them because they aren't experiencing what I'm experiencing. I'm not experiencing what they're experiencing. So it's, where do you feel the difficulty or where it needs to go for that to just kind of be the assumption? Because I know, like, just talking to you personally, you do work with a lot of devs.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of devs are more proactive, but obviously not all of them. Because I still can't play every video game that comes out when it first comes out. So where do you think changing, I guess, the culture on it, where it's just an assumption we're going to think about accessibility instead of someone feeling like they're going the extra mile?
Well, I'd argue and say that I think we don't have people making the assumption. I think or making the assumption that they're working on accessibility when they're not. I think the bigger problem I see is people just not caring, right? Or not understanding why accessibility is valuable. Now that's changed a lot. Now I only have to have that conversation about once every 2 months. In the past, I used to have it every day. So like we're getting better. People are starting to understand it. But kind of reminding people of the value, not just to gamers with disabilities, because obviously that's a fantastic thing, but this actually leads into the second point I was going to say. Like, it's also just good for the game, period. Like, how many of you play your games with subtitles turned on? Okay, how many of you are deaf? All right. So, obviously, these things can be used by people who don't have disabilities. Same thing with button remapping, right? Like, I love to remap buttons all the time. I have no problems using my hands, right? But it makes the game better for me when those features are allowed. So if we can convince devs that, yes, there's this community, we want to support them, we love them, we want them to be included, but in doing this, they can also just make the game generally better for everyone. Like that's when we start to get devs who go, oh, okay, and they start, okay, well, then what should I do? Where should I start? How can we get involved, right? Building that empathy is really, really critical, but also showing that, it's just going to make your game better. It's amazing how much that really helps kind of break down some of those barriers.
And I can tell you just as a consumer, if I believe that a dev cares about me, I'm going to give you my money. I own 5,000 physical video games.
I care about you.
Well, here you go.
I take Visa, MasterCard.
Gotcha. If you take Apple Pay, I can send it over to you. But like for me, I'll give an example. Again, this isn't just because you're here. That adaptive controller, I do not need personally. It does not benefit what I need to do to game. I bought it day one because I felt like, and again, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but like, Microsoft is a $1 trillion company. I know they don't care about me on a personal level, but seeing a gaming, because like I'm primarily an Xbox gamer, and seeing that they did something that, in my brain, this can't be a profitable thing that was made. There's like, it's more of a niche product that like not everyone needs, so they're not, it was probably made at a loss. But the fact that effort was made, I was like, I will support that. I'm going to give you the money for this, because I felt like you cared about me. And I feel the same way about games too. Like if I feel that, I don't have color blindness or blindness, but if you put that in there, I'm more willing to look at your game, because I know you're thinking about what I feel is important to me. So even selfishly, I feel like it's a good idea, because like you get the community involved with you.
Yeah. So first off, we do care about you.
Thank you.
And
well, I know you do.
I do, but and second of all, I mean, you're not the only first person who's told me that, which is amazing. Like certainly, I wasn't expecting people to buy this to just support us, but yet I've heard a lot of people say that, and for the very, very similar reasons, right? And similarly with games that are accessible, I do the same thing. If I see a game, it might not be my genre, it might be my style, but if they do some amazing accessibility stuff, I get it. Usually I make the excuse like, oh yeah, I'll take some screenshots from it, I'll use it in some documentation. So really, I'm just happy to support somebody who did a really awesome thing, right? But at the end of the day, again, most of the time, accessibility features, the vast majority of accessibility features are actually going to make games better for everyone, not just one particular person. So, even down to, things like, I've heard that some people who have been playing around with the drive assist, the blind drive assist in the new Forza are like, I'm not blind, but I turned on that audio cue thing, it's kind of cool, kind of feel like it kind of helps me like get a better sense of when I should, turn or when I should accelerate. I was like, wow, okay, if that works for you, great, so. Yeah, we really want people to understand that inclusive design makes games better for everybody, right? Not just specific groups of people with disabilities.
Well, do you want to maybe open up a couple questions? Is anyone?
Oh yeah, I'm always down for questions. Yeah.
So you said you've been working on accessibility for like 22 years?
20 years, yeah.
20, yeah. So I'm 24,
okay.
Just as a preface. I was wondering if you could...
Shut up.
I feel so old.
I was wondering if you could give like a snapshot of what accessibility meant 20 years ago versus what it means now, because like we were talking about how like something as simple as button remapping is accessibility, but also nowadays there are games you can play if you're blind, and I feel like, I'm guessing, but I feel like that wasn't even on the radar 20 years ago, that type of thing.
Oh no, back in 20 years ago, we had, for people who were blind, there were a few audio games for PC. You had some text-based games, you know, think that could work with screen readers, and that was about it. No one was talking about how you make Super Mario Brothers accessible. No one was talking about how you made Sonic the Hedgehog accessible. And I'm only saying that because, 24 years ago, Xbox didn't exist, so I'm not calling, back when before you were born, those were the products that just seem like they've been around, they're great franchises, they're such a part of our culture, right? And yet, no one was thinking about how do we make these more accessible. And the features that were in there that were accessibility features, they didn't call them accessibility features. A game might have remapping. A game might have a feature for, changing. In fact, a lot of people put them under cheats. They're like, oh, it's a cheat. You put on this cheat, and it makes it easier to see things. Okay, no, that's an accessibility feature. So that's how people thought about it back then. And again, that was when I had the most vociferous communication. People were the angstiest with me when I tried to talk about accessibility because they just were like, they shouldn't play games. Like, why? I literally had somebody ask me, why would a deaf person want to play a video game? And I was like, why do you want to play video games? For the same reason. But people just didn't get it. And one thing I will credit is I feel like as a society, not to get all philosophical and stuff, I feel like we are definitely getting better about understanding the needs of others and understanding and respecting people from diverse backgrounds. And as we're doing that, the industry's changing slowly but surely to adapt to that. So we're seeing more diverse content. We're seeing content made by more diverse creators. And we're also seeing more accessible content. So it's come a very long way. I'll give you, as one final little joke, example. When I started working on accessibility, it was 2003, about 2005 or 6, I met another person at Xbox who did accessibility. And we were talking one day, and she was telling me, oh yeah, I can't wait till we have a screen reader on the console. And I said, yeah, the day we have a screen reader on the console, pigs will fly. And I remember, fast forward, about 15, 16 years, I get this email one day, and it's just a picture of a pig with wings. We had launched our screen reader on the console, right? So that's how much of a difference it's been. That's how much of a mind shift it's been in that time. Yeah. You pick. I don't know.
We'll go you and then you.
Okay, I technically have two, but one's a short one, one's a longer one. I guess the first question I have is, it sounds so dumb asking, what's your favorite accessibility feature? But for me, I love when games add text locks, because my brain just processes words a lot faster than it should. It's like, wait, what'd you say? Do you have a favorite accessibility feature? And then the second one I have is, I'm a huge advocate for adults with disabilities, and I'm a caregiver actually, but I've always wondered, what kind of, I don't want to say job opportunities, but, what kind of, what kind of jobs does your department have that, for, I can't code to save my life, but, I love the idea of, advocating and working for those with disabilities. What does your department entail, if that makes sense?
I'll start on this with a couple things, and then you can kind of do the specifics for Microsoft. Honestly, I love text logs too, just because I am both because of my schedule and just how I like to play things, the amount of times I've had to restart an RPG because I had to work for a week, and then I come back and I'm like, well, I don't remember who any of these people are or what's happening. That was one of my favorite things that Dragon Quest XI did, actually, where every time you log in, here's a little, here's what you're doing. I'm like, oh, I remember that, got it. So I think that is a brilliant thing. Obviously, button remapping is huge for me. I think that just lets me. I feel like most games I can figure out a way to play. I want to be able to play. I'm a competitive dude. That's just who I am. I don't like losing because of anatomy.
Yeah.
If you beat me because you beat me, that's one thing. I don't want it to be because I couldn't figure this out because it didn't work. So that's for me. And as far as again, you can speak more on Microsoft specifically, but one thing I do for a lot of different companies, honestly, is consulting. That is something I help with, because I'll give you an example. It's not related to gaming. I'm from Indiana originally, and the Indiana State Police, right after I was on AGT, they reached out to me, and they wanted me to consult for their training about how police officers should deal if they're like pulling over someone with a disability, like what's the do's, what's the don'ts. And I'm never going to code either. My brain does not understand that. I don't know how to do any of it. But for me, just getting to be a voice, even to do something like this, I'm just a dude who loves video games and happens to have a disability. But if what I can say adds some insight, I feel that's very important. And if you're a caregiver, you might not be living with these disabilities, but you're on the front line, so to speak. Like, you kind of see what this is, so you have some insight. That, I feel, is something that is, again, maybe you're not creating the most, accessible game that's ever existed. You didn't make that. But those little parts, I think those little bricks build into that big thing at the end.
Actually, you have a disability, autism for the win.
Okay, fair enough.
You're neurospicy, just like me. I love
Oh,
it.
yes.
So I could say, because of my vestibular damage, field of view and, weapon bob options and head bob options and all that. But really my favorite one is in Another Crowd's Treasure, where you have the option to give Krill a gun. And basically the accessibility feature is, you turn it on and your tiny little crab all of a sudden gets a massive gun. And it kills anything with one shot. And it's really funny because in the accessibility community, people are talking about this because they're like, it really is an accessibility feature. People are like, oh, it's a cheat. No, it's not. I mean, you still have to play through the game. It makes certain aspects of the game easier. But what's really fun is they tackle it in kind of a unique way, right? It's kind of they made the accessibility a mechanic out of it, which was kind of fun, right? And so even if you don't need the accessibility feature, if you want to play with this crowd with this massive gun, you can play with it. So that's awesome. In terms of jobs, so we actually have a doctor of occupational therapy on our team. Yeah, we are starting to realize that people in medicine have a lot of information about the disability community, and they're really good at working with people in the disability community. So we're trying more and more as an industry to bring in the medical community to work with us to help figure out ways to make games better for people with disabilities, how to better interact with people with disabilities. So, on my team, unfortunately, we don't have any job openings at the moment, but yeah, I know. It's like right now in the industry.
I'm first in line. I tips.
You've already got a gig, right?
Yeah, but I can always have more.
But no, I would say there are job openings. In fact, last I heard, I think Sony has got one right now open for like an accessibility designer. What I would say is, don't worry so much when you're applying for a job about accessibility, about whether you meet the exact criteria. Talk about your passion, talk about your knowledge, what your background is. Don't be afraid to talk about lived experience. I think that's super, super important. And combine that with a little bit of self-study on game accessibility. Go look up the Xbox accessibility guidelines or the game accessibility guidelines. Go read WCAG, which is the web accessibility guidelines, right? Go learn a little bit more about the CDAA, the 21st Century Telecommunication Act, and how it applies to video games. And if you take all of that, you put it all together, you'll really put together, you'll have a good, you will put together a good package that sells yourself, and hopefully will bring you in to join us, because we'd love to have you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, what are some of the best central resources to learn about for people with different disabilities? What is a game that is appropriate for is there just a central database? Where can you learn more about choosing a game?
That is such a good question. So first off, so on the Xbox, we launched something a little while ago called accessibility feature tags. And what you can do is there's about 20 tags that cover a wide variety of different accessibility features. And you can filter on them in the Xbox store or on our web store. So you can say, I want to find a game with subtitles. I need a game that has this. And you can select multiple filters, so you can help filter that down. That's one way. But really the best way that I found recently is there's a site called the Family Gaming Database. Their website address is www.taminggaming.com. And they're awesome. And they do very, very intense accessibility reviews, and they leave all the accessibility information up there. It's a great place to look. Another site to look is Can I Play That? They have some really great accessibility reviews. There's also some great people online to follow. Antonio Martinez, Ian Hamilton, amazing folks who are always tweeting about really great accessibility features in games. Those are a bunch of different resources you can use. But know that as a vision I have for the industry before I retire, is that I would love to see a more universal, like, industry-funded database, right? That's platform agnostic, right? That covers everything. That really talks about these features in detail, and so people can really narrow down and not just say, I want to know what accessibility features it has, but I also want to know what genre it is, and I want to know, is it really easy or is it really hard? And I want to know, like, does it have any triggering content in it? And I really narrow it down to find exactly what I need. That's my hope. That's my dream. I've got 10 years to do it. I'm going to retire at 55. That's my solemn vow. I've been doing this too long, and that's my goal. I want to have that done by then. I don't know if it'll happen, but we'll try.
So Microsoft is kind of a unique entity, being both a console manufacturer as well as a game studio and publisher. What does that look like with like third-party companies? Is there kind of like a pipeline or communication? How do you like encourage those studios to include disability in their games as well?
It's a great question. So, I give a lot of talks. I go around a lot. I'm at GDC, the Game Developer Conference. I was just at Gamescom in Europe. So I do a lot of talks. But we also have programs in Microsoft where we'll work with third-party developers to help them make their games more accessible. We don't use accessibility as a competitive advantage. I just want to be very clear about that. I talk to Sony on a every other week basis almost. I talk to Nintendo even, about the same, yeah. Like, accessibility is not an area we want to compete, we want to collaborate, right? So, what I would say is that, again, sorry, my neurodiversity is rearing its ugly head. Can you repeat the question?
What do you do to encourage like third-party studios?
Right, sorry, thank you. So, so we're talking with these folks on a regular basis. We talk with publishers, I name the biggest publishers in the industry, we chat with them on a regular basis. But we also have programs to test. We have something called the MGATS program, the Microsoft Game Accessibility Testing Service. Game companies can submit their games to us, and we'll test them for accessibility with people with disabilities, and we'll send them detailed reports. We're talking reports that are 100, literally I had a report that was over 100 pages for one game. We'll send that out to them. It's a subsidized program. We try to keep the cost as low as possible so that we can get as much usage of that program. We've tested over 100 games so far, in fact, well over 100 games. So that's one way. We also create developer resources like the Xbox Accessibility Guidelines, which are a set of guidelines that game developers can use, and that they can use to make their games better for people with disabilities. They have examples, screenshots, they're broken up into different categories. We have that. We also have our Gaming and Disability Player Experience Guide. It's a lot of stuff, but where you can find all of this, if you're a developer and you want to learn more, you can go to aka.ms/XGA. And that is our site that has all of our developer resources that we've created. And we're constantly adding to it. In fact, spoiler alert, there may be something dropping next week. That should be pretty cool. So yeah, so if you're interested in that, check that out. But yeah, we really want to. So if anybody has, by the way, if anybody has a developer, they're like, oh yeah, I want to learn more about accessibility, they can email xpac@microsoft.com. And as consumers, if you all are just like curious about anything I've talked about today or any of our stuff, you can email us at xaccess@microsoft.com. We like X in everything. I don't know if you know that.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah. So yeah, so please reach out and we'd love to chat with you. And I'll also be up here afterwards and have business cards and happy to hand those out.
A couple more, right? Yes, yeah. So, I know it's hard to tell what I'm. That's
I'm interested to hear both your opinions on the state of difficulty modes in gaming right now. Both some games not having them, and maybe some ways they could be better.
I will go first just with my own personal opinion, because I do know that there is a mentality with a lot of gamers of get good. Like that is the thing. And I can respect that from a certain point. Like, some games are designed to be hard, and that's, that's the, one of the big themes of the game is that, hey, this game's gonna kick your ass. That's the point, For me, and it's not always necessarily disability related, but I think that having difficulty modes should be pretty standard, just because of, like, maybe something like Dark Souls, if you give me enough time, I can get good. However, I'm a touring stand-up comedian. I'm married. I have a 5-month-old son. I have other interests and hobbies, you know. I can't put in 200 hours to get good. So not even necessarily from a disability accessibility, I've heard Elden Ring's a pretty fun story. I don't have the time to get good enough to watch that story and play it myself. So I think it's something that should just be put in. I know it can be a very polarizing topic because some people take beating a very hard game as a badge of honor. Like, I beat this and not everyone can beat this, and that makes me feel special. For me personally, I just want to see the story. Celeste was great. Celeste was too hard for me, but it let me basically steamroll through it, and I love that because the story was great. I wouldn't have got to see it with just my skill set. That's just how it is.
Yeah, this is an incredibly fraught part of our community right now. There's a lot of real hatred in this space when people talk about this difficulty. All I'll say is this. From a developer standpoint, and I can say this because I've been there, I've worked on games, it is not hard to put in difficulty settings, okay? It's not, okay? So that's issue one. So anybody who's coming out and saying, oh, it's ruining, they spent so much time on difficulty that they could have been, no, it's simple, that's it. The second thing about difficulty is, to Ryan's point, like, it just makes the game better for everyone. Because again, I might not be able to have time to play that game on hard mode, right? I may not have time, or you know, even maybe necessarily the interest, right? This gives me an ability to experience while not taking away from your experience. You can still play it on Nightmare Bloody Hell mode, and you can beat it and have the achievement, and that's great. So all I'll say is, like, difficulty is something that I think people should really consider implementing, and not just like easy, medium, hard, but I'm talking about like different sliders for like puzzle difficulty, combat difficulty. You know, the more nuanced and the more specific you can get in terms of what changes you make with difficulty, the better. I think we're at time.
I think we're good.
But I tell you what, I'm going to be outside. I don't know if you'll be.
Yeah.
Will you be out there?
Yes, not talking to you.
Not talking to me, okay. But I'll be outside. If anyone wants to chat, I'm really happy to, and I'll have business cards. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. It really means a lot to show up.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and to the right are a few more videos from the Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2023. Thanks for watching.